You close the door behind you and the latch clicks louder than you remember. Just like that, the world is on the other side. And you're in here alone. It's not scary. It's not even sad. Not at first. It's just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything but makes you feel everything. They don't tell you about this version of independence. The kind that shows up in the silence after dinner or in the empty chair across from you. Everyone loves to talk about the freedom, how you can do what you want when you want without compromise. But no one tells you what it costs. I remember when I first started living alone in my 70s. People congratulated me. Good for you, they said. You've earned it. And I believed them. I poured myself a cup of tea, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the couch, thinking, this is peace. But peace has layers. At first, the quiet felt gentle. I could hear the wind outside, birds in the morning. I even started noticing the rhythm of the old clock in the hallway. Something I'd tuned out for decades, but soon that quiet started asking me questions. Questions I hadn't thought about in years. Who are you now? What matters when no one's watching? What are you really feeling when there's no one else to consider? No one warns you that living alone strips away the noise, but not just the noise of the world. It strips away the noise of your identity. The version of yourself you perform around others, the one that smiles when you don't feel like it, the one that laughs politely at dinner parties, agrees to things just to keep the peace. Or wears clothes you don't even like because someone once said they looked good on you. When you're constantly surrounded by people, it's easy to shapeshift, to become who others need you to be or expect you to be. Maybe it's the caregiver, the strong one, the dependable one, the peacemaker, the entertainer, the helper. We wear these masks so long they become second nature, so much so that we forget we're wearing them. But when you live alone, there's no audience, no script, no cues to follow. Suddenly you're not mom or grandpa or the nice neighbor or the reliable volunteer. You're just you. And if you haven't checked in with that person in a long time, it can be jarring. What do you really think when there's no one to impress, no one to placate, no one to explain yourself to? What do you want when no one else is around to shape the agenda? What do you believe when you're not mirroring someone else's convictions to keep the peace? At first, this stripped-down version of yourself can feel disorienting. You might feel untethered like a boat set loose from the dock. The silence starts to echo, not just in your home, but inside you. And in that space, the truest version of you starts to speak up. Hesitantly at first, quietly, but honestly. You begin to notice what actually brings you peace, not just what you've been told should. You discover which routines comfort you and which ones you were doing out of obligation. You realize that certain hobbies weren't really yours at all, they were someone else's passion that you went along with. And maybe, just maybe, the things you've been missing weren't things at all but pieces of yourself you left behind. And when those layers peel away, when you're no longer living through the lens of others' expectations, what's left can feel raw, even a little exposed, but it's real. And for maybe the first time in years, you're not performing, you're not adjusting, you're not editing yourself to fit someone else's comfort. You're simply being. That's the hard part and the beautiful part. Because from that rawness comes clarity, and from that clarity comes freedom. Living alone forces you to meet yourself again, not the version that showed up for everyone else, but the one that's been quietly waiting underneath it all. And while that meeting can be uncomfortable, it can also be deeply liberating. You stop living to please, you start living to feel, to grow, to reconnect with the parts of yourself that had to sit in the back seat for too long. And little by little, you begin to remember who you were before the roles, before the titles, before the masks. And more importantly, who you still are. I'd walk through the house touching objects I hadn't paid attention to in years. A framed photo, a chipped mug, a sweater that still smelled faintly of someone I loved. These things felt louder now, more alive. Or maybe I was just starting to notice what had always been there. That's the thing about being alone. You don't just see your life, you feel it. All of it. Some people call it loneliness. And yes, there's truth in that. But what I felt wasn't just the absence of people, it was the presence of memories, the weight of time. One evening I stood at the kitchen sink doing dishes. Just a plate, a fork, and a glass. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear my own breathing. And in that moment, it hit I hadn't spoken out loud in over a day. Not a word. Not even to myself. And the thing is, I hadn't even noticed. That realization lands hard because it forces you to confront a question we rarely ask ourselves. If no one's around to witness your life, is it still full? It can be. It absolutely can be. But you have to make that choice. Living alone doesn't fill your life for you. It doesn't bring joy to your door or structure to your days. It simply gives you space. And that space can either feel like a gift or a void. In the beginning, it felt like a void. I found myself doing things I'd never done before, talking to myself in the mirror, narrating my actions aloud just to hear a human voice in the room. I wasn't going crazy, I was just trying to feel real, seen, heard, connected, and that's something no one really tells you. Living alone challenges your sense of self in a way that few other things do. You're no longer reflected in someone else's eyes. You have to hold that mirror up yourself. It's not all heavy though, there's beauty too. You begin to discover new parts of yourself. I started painting again, nothing fancy, just watercolors in the morning light. I rearranged my furniture. I danced in the kitchen while cooking dinner, not caring who might see. These small freedoms, they start to add up. They remind you that you're still alive, still evolving. And slowly, that silence that once felt so heavy starts to change. It becomes familiar, even comforting. Not every day, but some days. Enough days. Because here's the truth, they don't put on greeting cards or in retirement brochures. Living alone forces you to become your own companion, your own caretaker, your own witness. And that's a different kind of strength, one that doesn't get applause, but changes you from the inside out. You start to realize how many parts of your day once revolved around someone else, making sure dinner was ready, asking how their day was, picking up small things at the store because they liked them, listening for the sound of the front door or the creak of footsteps upstairs. All those little gestures of connection that filled the air like background music on, and in their place, you did. So, you begin to learn how to sit with yourself, not just physically, but emotionally. When a hard day hits, there's no one to come home to and talk it out. No one to distract you or fix it or hold your hand until it passes. You become the one who sits beside yourself in the hard moments, the one who reminds you to breathe, to be gentle, to keep going. You learn to notice your moods more closely, to listen to the quiet signals your body sends, to know when it's time to push yourself in, when it's okay to rest. You become fluent in your own emotional language, something most people never take the time to learn because they're always too busy navigating the needs of others. Being your own caretaker means making choices every single day that no one will praise you for, but that matter anyway. Washing the dishes after a meal for one, taking a walk when your knee hurts but your spirit needs it, turning off the TV and going to bed at a decent hour, even when you could stay up until dawn and no one would know. These aren't grand gestures. They're acts of quiet discipline, of self. And then there's becoming your own witness. That might be the hardest part, because it means learning to see yourself clearly without the reflections of others to define you. No one to validate or challenge your thoughts. No one to bounce off of. You begin to narrate your own life. You become the one who notices your small victories, the one who sees the effort it took just to get out of bed on a hard day, the one who acknowledges your growth, your fears, your courage. It's not about being strong all the time. In fact, that's a myth worth letting go of. What matters more is being present with yourself, showing up in your own life day after day without waiting for someone else to do it for you. That means sitting with your joy when it shows up hand, letting yourself feel it fully. It also means sitting with your sadness, your boredom, your longing without rushing to numb it or sweep it away. And slowly, something shifts. You stop looking outside yourself for all the answers. You begin to trust that you are capable of holding your own story, of caring for your own needs, of loving yourself, not in a self-help slogan kind of way, but in a practical, daily, earned kind of way. It's not glamorous. It's not picture perfect, but it's real, and it's yours. I started keeping a journal again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. I wrote about the weather, the way the sun hit the window in the afternoon, the dream I had the night before. I wrote about my fears too, my hopes, the things I missed, the things I still wanted. And through that process, I began to find a rhythm again. Not the rhythm of the world outside, but a quieter, deeper rhythm, my own. You start to realize that this chapter of life, the one no one really talks about, is a chance to get reacquainted with yourself. Not the roles you've played, parent, partner, worker, friend, but the person underneath all of that. The one who's still here, the one who still matters. And that's the first thing they don't tell you about living alone as an older person. It's not just about being alone. It's about learning who you are when the noise fades, the crowd's thin, and you finally have the room to listen. The question is, will you? Let me know if you've ever felt this way in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. There was a morning not long after I started living alone when I stood in the kitchen staring at the toaster, wondering if it was even worth making breakfast. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because it just felt pointless. There was no conversation waiting at the table, no one to ask how I slept, no one to pour the second cup of coffee. Just me, just the silence, just the question. Does it matter if I eat today at all? And that's the second thing they don't tell you when you live alone. It's not the big moments that wear you down, it's the small ones. It's the quiet, ordinary moments that used to happen without a second thought. The passing glances, the lazy good morning mumbled over a yawn, the way to mugs would clink gently on the counter as coffee brewed, and the day slowly began. Those weren't just routines. They were rituals of connection, tiny threads that stitched your day together, even when nothing major was happening. You don't notice how sacred they are until they're gone. Now, it's just one cup, one plate, one chair pulled out. It's making eggs and realizing you'll probably eat them standing up. It's going hours without using your voice because there's no one to talk to. It's realizing that the soundtrack of your day used to include someone else's breathing, footsteps, laughter, and now it doesn't. You don't expect the silence to be so loud, or the solitude to be so sharp. There's a strange kind of ache that creeps in, not from tragedy, but from absence, from the slow erosion of shared experience, from the moments that used to feel small but, in hindsight, carried so much meaning. Those glances, those murmurs, the shared jokes, even the little annoyances, they were proof that you were woven into someone else's life. And now, you wake up and realize that every part of your routine is entirely your own. Your choices, your time, your messes, your meals. There's freedom in that, sure, but also a kind of floating, a lack of grounding. No one notices if you skip breakfast. No one checks if you made the bed. No one cares if you've worn the same sweater 3 days in a row. That's what starts to wear you down. Not the big events, the birthdays or holidays. You can plan around those. You can brace yourself, but it's the everyday moments that chip away slowly. The spaces where presence used to live, the small, seemingly insignificant corners of your day where someone else's life used to touch yours, that's the real loneliness. Not being alone in a room, but being alone in a routine. Being alone in a life that used to echo with someone else's rhythm and now only follows your own. But in recognizing that emptiness, you also begin to see where the new rhythm could be. You realize that while no one may be there to notice, you are still here. You can still choose to make the breakfast, to play the music, to say good morning out loud even if no one hears it. Because maybe the most important person to notice is you. When those disappear, it's like losing the background music of your life. I didn't expect that. I thought loneliness would come in big waves, holidays, anniversaries, the hard stuff. But instead, it crept in quietly. It showed up in the way the hallway echoed when I walked through it. In the untouched side of the bed that hadn't been slept in for years. In the way I'd reach for my phone and realize I had no one to text just to say, guess what I saw today. It's a specific kind of emptiness, one that even people with good intentions can't fully understand unless they've lived it. And it's not just about missing people, it's about missing being needed, about not being part of someone's everyday life. When you're alone, there's no one checking in when you're late coming home, no one asking how your day was. And when something good happens, really good, you have to decide whether to just smile quietly to yourself, or try to share it with someone who may or may not have the time to listen. And so, days begin to blend together, not because you're lazy or bored, but because routine without connection starts to feel thin. The richness of life begins to fade unless you intentionally add the color back in. I remember one Tuesday it was a Tuesday because I wrote about it later. I decided to go out just for the sake of breaking the rhythm. I went to the local grocery store. I didn't even need much, just milk and a few apples. But when the cashier smiled at me and asked how my day was going, I almost cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone noticed me. Someone spoke to me like I mattered. And that's when I realized I had to stop waiting for life to come knock on my door. I had to create the connections I craved. Not grand gestures, not dramatic reinventions. Just small, deliberate choices. Like walking around the neighborhood at the same time every morning, so I'd run into the same dog-walking couple. Like going to the library on Thursdays because I knew the front desk clerk always wore funny socks and loved talking about mystery novels. These things sound small, and they are. But when you live alone, they become everything. They become your community, your structure, your anchor. Loneliness never really leaves. It just becomes something you learn to walk beside. Some days it sits quietly in the corner. Other days it pulls up a chair at the table. But over time, it stops being the enemy. It becomes a mirror, a reminder. It tells you what you need, and if you're paying attention, it can teach you how to meet those needs yourself. One of the biggest turning points for me was this. I stopped framing solitude as an absence and started seeing it as a space I could fill with meaning. I started doing small things with intention, making a full breakfast, setting the table, even if it was just for me, lighting a candle at dinner, playing music in the background, not to drown out the silence, but to shape it. I started writing letters again, even when I wasn't sure who'd write back. I made it a rule to talk to one person every day. In person, if I could. If not, a phone call, a message, something. Because human connection isn't just nice, it's vital. It's as essential as sleep or water. You can go without it for a little while, but eventually, your soul gets thirsty. And slowly, something began to shift. The loneliness didn't vanish, but I no longer felt like it defined me. It was just one piece of the picture, not the whole thing. I met Mary at the park one afternoon. She was sitting on a bench, knitting, watching the ducks float by. I asked about her scarf. She asked if I lived nearby. We talked for almost an hour. 2 weeks later, we met for tea. Now we meet every Sunday. No big plans, no pressure, just presence. That's what I wish someone had told me sooner. Living alone doesn't mean you have to go it alone. Connection won't always come to you, but you can go to it. You can create it, seek it, nurture it. Sometimes all it takes is a hello. There's this myth that independence means doing everything by yourself. But real strength isn't about isolation. It's about knowing when to reach out. It's about choosing to stay open even when it hurts, even when it would be easier to turn inward and shut the world out. So if you're watching this and some of what I've said sounds familiar, let me say this to you directly. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And your life is still filled with the potential for joy, connection, and meaning, even if it looks different than it used to. You just have to be willing to knock on a few new doors. And maybe, just maybe, open a few of your own. Have you had a moment like that where something small broke through the loneliness and reminded you you're still part of the world? Share it in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. There's a moment, after you've lived alone long enough, when you realize something surprising. The smallest things now carry the most weight. Folding laundry becomes a ritual. Watering the plants feels like a quiet promise to keep going. Even making your bed in the morning doesn't just tidy the room, it tells you that the day still matters. These aren't chores anymore, they're choices. Acts of care, little anchors in the tide of time. No one told me that. No one said that brushing crumbs off the table or lighting a candle at dusk would become emotional touchstones, proof that I was still tending to life, even when no one else was watching. The world moves fast. Your children, your old colleagues, your old routines, they all keep going, rolling forward like a train you once rode but somehow stepped off. At first, you try to keep up. You check your calendar. You reply to messages. You smile through FaceTime calls that are just a little too short. But gradually you notice the distance growing, not just in miles, but in pace. Their days are full meetings, errands, soccer games, group chats buzzing late into the night. And meanwhile, your life has slowed. Not in a sad way, but in a quieter, more deliberate rhythm. And in that stillness, you begin to notice things most people miss. You watch the way light shifts in your living room throughout the day, from the soft gray blush of early morning to the warm golden wash that lands on your kitchen counter around 4 in the afternoon. You know exactly when that happens now. You wait for it. You can tell by sound alone. When the kettle is just seconds away from whistling, the first few tiny rattles, the swell of steam, and that final high, clear note breaking the silence like a bell. You hear the rain not just when it starts, but how it builds. A single drop on the windowsill, then a quiet patter, then a steady rhythm. At 2 in the morning, when the rest of the world is asleep and traffic has faded, the rain becomes a kind of music that only you are awake to hear. These moments aren't dramatic. They don't make headlines. No one writes songs about them, but they are real, and they are yours. They become a kind of private language between you and your home, a daily conversation between you and the life you've built, a reminder that your presence matters even if no one else sees it. And in these moments, something profound happens. You stop rushing, you stop comparing, you stop waiting for the next big thing to make you feel alive, because you realize it's already here, in the flicker of candlelight, in the creak of floorboards beneath your feet, in the breath you take as you open the window and smell the air after rain. These are not just empty spaces between events. These are the events, and the beauty of living alone is that no one interrupts them. You get them all to yourself, to witness, to savor, to hold. In a world obsessed with constant motion, you become someone who sees the world in slow motion, and that is not a loss. That is a gift. Living alone teaches you to pay attention, not just to your surroundings, but to yourself. You start to sense when your energy dips, when your thoughts turn heavy, when you need to reach out. You become your own caretaker in a way that's both empowering and sometimes exhausting. Because here's another truth they don't tell you. Being self-sufficient doesn't mean you won't struggle. It just means no one else will see it, unless you say something. That flickering light bulb, you fix it. That jar lid that won't open, you wrestle with it until your hands ache. That nagging pain in your hip, you wait a few days hoping it goes away because you don't want to make a fuss. You don't want to bother anyone. But over time you begin to understand, asking for help is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that even alone you are still part of something bigger. A neighborhood, a network, a community. You learn to prepare, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself, for your future. I made a list of emergency contacts and taped it inside my cupboard. I labeled my medications. I taught myself how to reset the breaker box and shut off the water valve. I even practiced what to say if I ever needed to call for help but couldn't stand up. That might sound extreme, but when you live alone, being ready becomes part of your routine. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being kind to your future self. Health, too, becomes something you hold with both hands. I started setting reminders for my checkups. I built a small sick day kit just in case. I read more labels, took more walks. I began to see every small choice, not as a restriction, but as a chance to stay independent a little longer. But perhaps the most powerful preparation is the emotional kind. There's a quiet strength that comes from learning to sit with your feelings without distraction, without apology. The nights when you cry and no one knows, the mornings when you feel forgotten, the celebrations that pass without a card or even a call. You begin to grieve not just for people, but for versions of yourself that no longer exist. And then something shifts. One afternoon, I caught myself laughing out loud, alone while reading an old letter I found tucked inside a cookbook I hadn't opened in years. It slipped out when I turned the page, folded neatly, yellowed at the edges. With handwriting I hadn't seen in so long, it felt like discovering a forgotten part of myself. It was from my sister. She had written it decades ago, after a weekend we'd spent cooking together. Nothing profound, nothing heavy, just a few lines, teasing me about burning the biscuits and how we somehow managed to turn mashed potatoes into glue. Her words were light, playful, full of affection and inside jokes that only siblings understand. But something about the way she wrote it, so casual and familiar, made me laugh out loud, one of those laughs that comes from deep in the belly, before you even realize it's happening. And in that moment, the silence in the room changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt full, like someone else had entered the space with me. Like the walls remembered too. The joy was real, unexpected, unfiltered. It reminded me that living alone doesn't mean living without beauty or laughter, or love. We think of those things as things we share, and they often are. But they also live inside us in memories, in letters, in old songs that play when you least expect them, in the smell of something baking that takes you back 40 years. That letter didn't just make me smile. It reminded me of who I was back then, of what mattered. And it reminded me that even though people change and some are no longer here, the love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. That's the quiet gift of solitude. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, something small cracks through the silence and lets the light in. A memory, a laugh. A flicker of connection that tells you you're still alive. You still feel, you still remember, and your story is still being written, even if you're the only one in the room. You begin to find magic in unexpected places. Not the grand kind of magic, no fireworks, no fanfare, just small, quiet moments that sneak up on you and soften something inside. Like a neighbor who always used to keep to himself suddenly waving from across the street. It's a simple gesture, over in a second. But in that brief wave, you feel something stir, a reminder that someone sees you. That you're still part of a world that's moving, even if your own feels still. Or a text from your grandchild. No full paragraphs, no deep conversation, just 3 words. Thinking of you, that's it. But it lands like a gift. You read it once, then again, letting the words settle in because they didn't have to send it. And yet, they did. In the middle of their busy, fast-moving life, they paused. For you, even the smell of bread baking store-bought dough, nothing fancy can become a kind of comfort. It fills the kitchen with warmth, with memory. Maybe it takes you back to a time when the house was noisier, fuller, when someone else sat at the table with a buttered slice in hand. Or maybe it just reminds you that you're still here, still capable of creating something small and satisfying. These moments don't demand your attention, they don't shout. But when you live alone and live fully alone, you begin to notice them because you have to pay attention. You're not rushing out the door, you're not distracted by noise. You're awake to the details, the light slanting across the floor. The rhythm of the dishwasher, the way your cat curls into the sunspot on the carpet, and in that attentiveness you start to realize, this is life too. Not what's scheduled, not what's posted online, but what's real, what's right in front of you. When you slow down, the world reveals things most people miss, small gestures, tiny joys, the flicker of connection that might otherwise pass by unnoticed. You learn that magic doesn't always come in grand moments, it often arrives in whispers. And when you're paying attention, even the quietest ones can echo. Because when you live alone, these little things don't just brighten your day, they make your day. There's one more thing they don't tell you about living alone. It becomes a mirror. A quiet, unblinking mirror that reflects your life back at you, not just the parts you're proud of, but everything. It shows you your regrets. The phone calls you never returned. The apology you waited too long to say. The dreams you shelved for later, and then later never came. When the world is quiet and no one is there to distract you, those moments rise to the surface. They sit with you in the stillness. And sometimes, they sting. But the mirror doesn't stop there. It also reflects your resilience. The times you got up when no one saw. The way you've kept going, even when it would have been easier to give up. The strength it takes to sit alone at the dinner table and still set out a napkin. The courage it takes to face the day when no one is expecting you to. It shows you the ways you've adapted. Maybe you've learned how to fix a leaky faucet, or how to manage your health appointments without someone else's reminders. Maybe you've found new routines, new joys, even new friendships in places you never would have looked before. That's not just survival, that's growth. The mirror reveals how far you've come. It reminds you that while you may carry wounds, you also carry wisdom. That every line on your face tells a story, not just of loss, but of endurance, of learning, of becoming. And perhaps most importantly, the mirror gives you back to yourself. Not the version of you shaped by other people's needs or expectations, but you unfiltered, unmasked, and still evolving. You see your tenderness, your grit, the quiet dignity in how you care for yourself even when no one else is watching. Living alone strips away the noise. Yes, but it also brings you face to face with your own humanity. And in that honest reflection, you begin to understand that you're not just surviving solitude, you're being refined by it. So while others may rush past their reflections, distracted by the noise of a busy life, you have learned to look, to sit with what you see, to honor it. Because living alone doesn't mean you're broken or finished or forgotten. It means you've met yourself and kept going. You might think your best days are behind you, that your story is mostly written, but solitude has a way of showing you that the pen is still in your hand. You can still write, you can still dream, you can still surprise yourself. I joined a community choir last year. I hadn't sung in front of people since I was a teenager. My voice cracked. My knees shook, but I did it. And afterward, walking home under the stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Living alone is not an ending. It's not the final chapter people sometimes assume it is. It's not a fading out. It's a shift, a turning inward. A quiet transformation that doesn't always look dramatic from the outside, but inside. It's profound. It's where distractions fall away, and what's left is something far more honest. It's where you begin to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by duty or noise or other people's needs, but the one that has always lived inside you, waiting for space to speak. It's where you meet yourself again, perhaps for the first time, without the roles, without the titles, without the constant expectations pulling you in a dozen directions. Just you, raw, real, and present. And that's where the growth begins. Not in chasing something new, but in rediscovering what's always been there. The strength that helped you survive all those storms, the wisdom you earned one hard day at a time, the quiet curiosity that still flickers, asking, what if there's more for me? Because here's what no one tells. You living alone doesn't mean you're unloved. It doesn't mean you've been forgotten. And it definitely doesn't mean you're finished. It means you have a new kind of freedom, a new kind of time, a new kind of power. Yes, the silence can be sharp. Yes, some days feel heavy. But in that space, you get to choose again. You get to shape your days not around what others expect, but around what your soul craves. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's expression. Maybe it's connection on your own terms. Maybe it's just one slow, sacred cup of tea in the morning light. You are still becoming someone more rooted, more aware, more tender with yourself. Becoming someone who knows that life doesn't end when things change, just opens a new door. And sometimes what's on the other side is something you never would have found in the noise and rush of before. You are still here, still becoming, still allowed to dream, to try, to reach. And that matters more than you may ever know. So if you're watching this and you've felt the weight of solitude, know this. You are not alone in feeling alone, and there is nothing small or insignificant about the life you're living. The fact that you wake up, show up, and find meaning in your days, even when no one else is watching, that's not just admirable, that's powerful. So go light the candle, make the cup of tea, call the friend, water the plant, write the poem, bake the cake, take the walk. Life is still happening and you're still here. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. And if something in this series touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.